The wind that morning came in dry and sharp, scraping across the Wyoming plains like the edge of a dull knife. Dust rose from the trail in slow spirals, clinging to man on horseback as he rode with a quiet determination. His name was Cole McAllister, a rancher known across 3 counties as a man who collected what was owed, no matter how long it took or how far he had to ride to get it. His duster coat was the color of clay, his hat tilted low to keep the sun from his eyes. The weight of his revolver sat steady on his hip, not for show but as a part of him. The way scars are a part of man's skin. He left before dawn, the letter folded once in his pocket. Ink faded, words sharp enough to remind him why he was there. $500. That's what Tom Ward had borrowed from him 2 winters ago. Swearing on his own life, he'd pay it back after striking gold in the Copper Ridge mines. But Tom Ward's life had been worth less than his word. A mining collapse had buried him and 10 others. Cole never got his money, and debts didn't die with the man who owed them. When he reached the rise overlooking Widow's Hollow, he reined in his horse. Below stretched a dying patch of land, fences falling on themselves, a barn leaning like an old drunk, smoke rising thin from a chimney that looked one gust away from toppling. A woman stood near the well, sleeves rolled to the elbow, pumping water with a rhythm that spoke exhaustion more than strength. For small figures played, or tried to, around the yard, their clothes faded, their laughter thin. Cole watched for a long moment, his jaw tightening. He told himself it didn't matter who lived there. The land was collateral, the debt was law. Still, something in that scene, the quiet struggle of it, made the air heavier around him. He nudged his horse forward. The sound of hoofbeats carried long before he arrived. The woman straightened, one hand shading her eyes. She wasn't young, though she couldn't be past 30. Her face bore the lines of someone who'd forgotten what rest felt like, yet her posture was proud, unbent. The kind of pride that didn't come from comfort, but from surviving one too many storms. Morning, Cole said, swinging down from his horse. His voice was steady, measured. You Mrs. Ward? She nodded once. I am. You're trespassing. Her tone didn't tremble. Cole found that oddly respectable. Name's Cole McAllister. I'm here on account of your husband's debt. The children had gone quiet, their eyes wide. One boy clutched his mother's skirt. The woman's hand stilled on the well handle. My husband's dead, she said after a moment, each word clipped. I know. The debt ain't. Something flickered in her expression. Anger, grief, maybe both. We don't have $500. If that's what you came for, you wasted your ride. Cole stepped closer, his boots crunching on dry earth. Then maybe I take the land instead. Papers say it's worth near enough. You'd take a roof from children? She asked quietly. He looked at her then, really looked. The wind caught strands of her dark hair, pulling them loose from her braid. Her dress was faded but clean, patched more times than he could count. The youngest child, a girl no older than 2, sat on the ground beside a tin cup, trying to scoop dirt like it was soup. This land's worth something to me, he said, though the words came slower now. Not to anyone else, she replied. The well runs dry by midsummer. The crops failed last year, and the cows died in the freeze. Take it if you think it'll make you richer. He studied her for a long moment. Her voice wasn't pleading, it was matter of fact. She'd stopped expecting mercy long ago. That, more than anything, unsettled him. One of the boys, about 6, tugged at her skirt. Mama, he whispered, I'm hungry. She reached into her apron and pulled out a piece of cornbread, breaking it into 4 tiny parts, handing one to each child. She didn't take any for herself. Cole watched. Something twisted in his chest, an echo from years back. His own mother doing the same thing during the drought, telling him she'd already eaten when she hadn't. He turned away, jaw set. You got any work that pays? She looked at him with quiet defiance. I sew. I take in mending. Some weeks I sell eggs when the hens are kind enough to lay. That won't cover $500. I'll find a way. Her words weren't boastful, just certain in a way that made him believe she'd try even if it killed her. Cole stepped back toward his horse. I'll give you 3 weeks, he said finally. After that, I come for what's mine. She straightened, shoulders stiff. 3 weeks won't change what's owed. Maybe not, he replied, mounting up, but it'll tell me what kind of woman I'm dealing with. He pulled the reins and turned the horse toward the trail, but before he'd gone 20 yards, the sky darkened. Clouds rolled in from the west, heavy and bruised with rain. The wind picked up, rattling the broken boards of the barn. A storm was coming fast. He glanced back. The woman was still standing by the well, watching the clouds gather. One of the boys ran for the house, shouting something he couldn't hear. Cole cursed under his breath. He could make it back to the ridge if he rode hard, but the lightning was too close already. He turned back toward the cabin. "Your roof holding a storm?" he called. "Barely," she said. "Then I'd better not be under it," he muttered, dismounting anyway. By the time the rain came, it was like the sky split open. Sheets of water poured over the land, drumming on the tin roof, flooding the yard. Cole tied his horse to the porch rail and followed her inside. The place was smaller than he expected. One main room with a hearth, a rough table, and 2 beds pushed together for children. The air smelled with smoke and damp earth. "You can wait it out by the fire," she said without looking at him. "But I don't have coffee to spare. I didn't ask for any." He removed his hat, shook off the rain, and leaned against the wall. The children huddled near the hearth, wide-eyed. The youngest whimpered, and the widow, Elena, he remembered from the letter, lifted the child onto her lap. The storm howled through the cracks in the roof. Water dripped near the door. Without a word, Elena grabbed a bucket and placed it beneath the leak. Then she climbed onto a stool, pressing a rag into the hole to slow the flow. When the stool wobbled, she steadied herself with one hand, still holding the baby in the other. Cole moved before he could think. He caught the stool, holding it firm. "You're going to break your neck." "Roof won't fix itself," she said. He grunted. "You could wait till morning. Tomorrow might bring more rain." There was no arguing with her. She pressed the rag tighter, then climbed down, soaked and shivering. Cole took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. She stiffened. "I don't need—" "It's not charity," he cut in. "Just common sense." For a moment, they stood there, the sound of rain filling the silence between them. Then she nodded once and went back to tending the fire. Hours passed before the storm eased. The children had fallen asleep by the hearth, curled together under a worn quilt. Elena sat nearby, mending a sleeve by candlelight, her hand steady despite the chill. Cole found himself watching her, not in the way men watch women, but in the way a man studies something he can't quite understand. "Why'd you stay?" he asked finally. "Could have left this place after your husband died." She didn't look up. "It's the only place my children have ever known. Tom built the cabin. His grave's out back. Leaving would feel like forgetting." He nodded slowly. "And the debt?" "I didn't know about it till after he passed," she said quietly. "Found the papers among his things. I suppose he meant to tell me when he could pay it off. Or when he couldn't." She met his gaze then, her eyes steady. "Maybe, but I won't blame a dead man for trying to give his family a chance." There was no bitterness in her voice, only a kind of weary grace. Cole looked away, ashamed of how small his own justifications suddenly felt. By dawn, the storm had passed. The world outside was washed clean, the air cold and sharp. Cole stepped outside to untie his horse and paused. The fence near the corral had collapsed during the night. Without thinking, he rolled up his sleeves and began to lift the fallen rails back into place. His hands worked fast, muscle memory from years of ranch labor guiding him. When he was done, he wiped the mud from his palms and glanced toward the cabin. Elena stood at the doorway, arms folded, a faint look of surprise on her face. "Didn't think debt collectors fixed fences. Didn't think widows patched roofs in the rain," he replied. That almost earned him a smile, almost. He pulled his hat down low and mounted his horse. 3 weeks, Mrs. Ward," he said. "You've got till then. And after that?" He hesitated, meeting her gaze. "After that, I'll do what I have to." She nodded, unflinching. "Then I'll do what I can." For a long moment, neither moved. The wind rustled through the wet grass, the sky pale with morning. Then Cole turned his horse toward the trail and rode away, the sound of hooves fading into the distance. From the porch, Elena watched until he was nothing more than a speck against the horizon. She held her baby close. The others clustered around her. The land around them stretched endless and empty, but her voice, when she spoke, was steady as stone. "He thinks I'm afraid," she murmured. "He's wrong." Inside the cabin, the fire crackled softly, the scent of smoke and wet earth lingering like a promise. Out on the ridge, the rancher rode hard toward the rising sun, tried to convince himself that it was just business, that he hadn't left something behind worth more than money. But the truth, deep down, was already there. He could feel it with every hoofbeat, a weight he hadn't counted on carrying. And though he wouldn't admit it yet, part of him already knew. When those 3 weeks were over, he'd be coming back. Not for the debt, but for the woman who'd face him down with nothing but pride, courage, and 4 hungry children she refused to let the world take from her. 3 weeks passed beneath a sun that showed no mercy. Each dawn broke red and dry, painting the sky in bloodlight before turning everything to dust. Widow's Hollow lay quiet but never still. The sound of shovel-biting earth or the cry of a child carried through the mornings like clockwork. Elena Ward rose before the first rooster call and worked until the moon came up again. She didn't count the days by the calendar, but by what her hands had built and what they had not yet finished. Her fields were cracked and near barren, but she kept digging, turning the soil, praying it would give something back. She'd traded her wedding ring for a sack of cornmeal and a spool of thread in town. The neighbors, what few remained, had troubles of their own. Those who came by the cabin brought pity more than help, and pity didn't fill stomachs. The children learned not to ask for things she couldn't give. They ate sparingly, spoke softly, and grew thinner with every week. Still, there was a stubborn light in their eyes, a reflection of their mother's will. By the second week, the hens stopped laying. The last goat wandered off, and the nights grew colder. Elena patched holes in the children's clothes by candlelight, her fingers raw from the needle. When her youngest coughed, she sang low hymns learned from her mother's Bible, though she no longer believed God was listening. The only thing she believed in now was her word, and she'd given it. She would pay that debt somehow. On the morning of the 12th day, a coyote came sniffing around the edge of the yard. She saw its shadow first, long and lean across the doorframe. The boys were asleep by the fire. Quietly, she lifted the rifle from its hook above the hearth and stepped outside. The animal was thin, ribs showing beneath its coat, eyes bright with hunger. It crept closer, drawn by the smell of cornbread scraps. Elena cocked the hammer. The click broke the silence. The coyote froze, then lunged. The shot rang out, echoing across the valley. The beast dropped in the dirt, thrashing once before going still. Her hands trembled only after it was done. She stood there a long time, breathing hard, the smoke curling from a barrel. Inside, the baby had begun to cry. Elena whispered, "It's all right now," though she wasn't sure it was. By sundown, news of her kill had reached the trading post 5 miles east, and from there it traveled fast, as things did in small towns with little else to talk about. By the next morning, it reached Cole McAllister. He was in town to settle accounts and sell cattle, standing at the counter of the mercantile when the storekeeper mentioned it. "You hear about Widow Ward? Shot a coyote bold as brass right in her yard. Folks say she's tougher than she looks." Cole's hand paused over his ledger. "Is that so?" The storekeeper chuckled. "Guess she's still trying to pay off that debt you came for. Shame about her husband. Good man, lousy luck." Cole said nothing. He finished his business and rode out before the sun reached its peak. He told himself he was just checking on his investment, making sure the land wasn't falling apart. But as he rode, the lie settled heavy in his chest. The road back to Widow's Hollow was harder than he remembered. The creek beds were dry, the wind sharp with grit. When he reached the cabin, he found her in the yard, mending a fence rail with one hand while holding the baby with the other. Sweat darkened the fabric along her back, and her hair was tied in a loose knot that kept slipping free. She looked up when she heard him. "I wasn't expecting company," she said. "I wasn't planning on staying," he replied. "Just passing through, then keep passing." He almost smiled. You always as friendly to visitors. Only the ones who threaten to take my home. He dismounted and walked closer, his boots sinking into the soft dirt. Word reached me in town you killed a coyote, only because it tried to take what's mine. Her tone made him stop. She meant more than a goat or a scrap of bread. She meant everything she'd built, everything she refused to lose. He nodded toward the half-collapsed barn. You're trying to rebuild that? Trying, she said, and failing slower than yesterday. When he saw the scrape on her arm and the way she favored her right leg, he frowned. You hurt. It's nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Later, when she turned, he saw the blood seeping through her sleeve. She'd fallen recently, maybe while hauling lumber. Let me help. I don't need your help. He took a step closer. You're bleeding, Mrs. Ward. She glared. It's Elena. He paused and nodded. All right, Elena. Sit down before you fall down. There was a beat of silence, and then, perhaps out of exhaustion more than agreement, she sank onto the porch step. He fetched water from the well, tore a strip from his own shirt, and cleaned the wound. She watched him warily, like a caged animal that hadn't decided whether to bite. When he finished, he said, That arm's no good for lifting. You'll need rest. She gave a small, humorless laugh. Rest is for people who can afford to stop. He stood, looking over the barren fields. What if I gave you work? Her eyes narrowed. Work? I need someone at the ranch who can handle laundry, ledgers, that kind of thing. Pays fair. Enough to clear your debt in time. She said nothing. The wind rustled through the grass, tugging at the loose strands of her hair. Finally, she asked, Why me? Because you're the only person I've met in months who won't break before the first frost. Her gaze softened just slightly. And if I refuse, then you'll still owe me, he said quietly, and I'll still have to collect. She looked toward the children playing by the fence, their laughter carrying faintly through the dry air. Pride wore with practicality, and practicality won. When do we start? Tomorrow, he said. Pack what you need. By the next dawn, she was on the wagon with her children, heading toward the McAllister Ranch. The journey was rough, the wheels biting into ruts deep as graves, but she kept her eyes forward. Cole rode ahead, silent most of the way. He caught her watching him once or twice, measuring, mistrusting, curious. When they crested the ridge, the sight of his land made her breath catch. Miles of fenced pasture, a main house 2 stories high, stables lined in perfect order. Men worked the fields, cattle grazed fat and unbothered. It looked like a world untouched by the hunger she'd known. Inside the main house, the cook, a big woman named Hetty, took to the children at once, clucking over their thin arms and dirt-streaked faces. Elena didn't like the pity, but accepted the meal Hetty placed in front of them. It was more food than they'd seen in weeks. Cole showed her to a small room off the kitchen, plain but clean. You can stay here till you earn your pay, he said. And after that? That depends how long you plan on fighting the world. She looked around, touching the windowsill, the fresh linens. It's kind of you, she said finally, though her tone held no warmth. I'm not kind, he replied. I'm practical. But later, when he saw her eldest boy, Sam, watching horses with awe, Cole found himself saddling one and giving the boy a short lesson in how to ride. The kid fell twice and got up twice more, dirt on his face and a grin wide as a prairie. Elena watched from the porch, her expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he tipped his hat. She turned away before he could see the tears she refused to shed. Days turned to weeks, and something in the air between them began to shift. She worked hard, keeping the books neat, the laundry spotless, the kitchen running smooth. He found himself waiting for the sound of her voice in the hall, or the sight of her by the corral. One evening, while mending tack in the stable, Cole heard her outside talking softly to the children. Her voice carried through the slats, low and steady. You see that man? He's the one who lent your pa the money. We're paying him back fair and square. Cole's chest tightened. He didn't want to be the villain in her story, but maybe that's what he was. A few nights later, thunder rolled across the plains again. The air smelled of rain and lightning. Elena came running to the barn, One of the children had gone missing. The youngest boy, Luke, had chased a stray calf past a fence and hadn't returned. Without hesitation, Cole saddled his horse. "Stay here," he ordered. "I'm coming with you," she said. He wanted to argue but saw the fear in her eyes. So they rode out together into the storm, the wind tearing at their clothes. The rain came hard, turning the ground slick. They found the boy huddled beneath a fallen tree, shivering but alive, when Elena gathered him into her arms. Her tears mixed with the rain. Cole looked away, feeling something stir that he hadn't felt in years, something dangerously close to tenderness. Back at the ranch, as she tucked the boy into bed, he stood at the doorway. "You handled yourself well," he said. She brushed damp hair from her face. "I do what I must." Their eyes met in the dim light. For a moment, neither looked away. Then she said, almost a whisper, "You're not the man I thought you were." "Maybe I am," he murmured. "You just ain't seen the worst of me yet." But when he left the room, his hands trembled. In the days that followed, he found himself looking for excuses to be near her, offering to check the books, to help with the wagon, to show the children how to fish. The men on the ranch began to talk, low and careful, but he ignored them. He'd been rich for a long time, but he couldn't remember the last time he'd felt something worth more than the weight of gold. Then one morning, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon. 3 riders approached fast, their silhouettes sharp against the rising sun. Cole knew the look of them, Vickers' men, debt collectors from the old mining town. They rode hard and mean, the kind who didn't knock before taking. When they reached the yard, the leader, a thick-set man with a scar across his cheek, spat in the dirt. "Heard you're keeping a debtor's wife under your roof, McAllister. That's our business." Cole's hand went to his revolver, slow and deliberate. "She's under my protection." "Protection?" The man sneered. "You always as generous with your property?" The word hit like a whip crack. Elena, who'd stepped out onto the porch, went pale. The children huddled behind her. Cole's voice dropped low. "You boys best ride out while you still got horses to do it." The scarred man smirked. "This ain't over, rancher. The widow's debt ain't just yours to collect." They turned their horses and rode off, leaving a trail of dust and threat behind. When they were gone, Elena looked at him, her face drawn tight. "Who were they?" "Men you don't want to cross," he said. "They'll be back." Her voice was calm, but her hands shook. "Then I should leave. I won't bring trouble to your door." He stepped closer, his tone sharp. "You're not running again. I'm not your responsibility." He met her gaze, the storm still in his eyes. "Maybe not, but you're under my care now. That means something." For a moment, the world seemed to hold still, the wind, the horses, even the cries of the children inside. Then she whispered, "You can't protect us from everything." "No," he said quietly, "but I can damn sure try." The sky darkened behind him, clouds rolling in like a warning. Far off, the faint echo of thunder grumbled across the plains. Neither of them spoke again, but both knew what it meant. Trouble was coming for Widow's Hollow, and this time it would take more than pride to survive it. Snow had fallen again by the time Elijah Boone rode back down that long ridge. The air was sharp, clean, and cold enough to sting the lungs, and the land below lay quiet. Too quiet for comfort. Smoke trailed from the cabin's chimney in thin gray fingers, and that alone was enough to send a prickle of unease down his spine. He hadn't expected warmth after what had happened. He hadn't expected to feel anything but the hollowness that had chased him since he'd ridden away from that doorstep 2 weeks ago. But here he was, riding back toward the widow and the 4 children he'd once thought were nothing but a debt he'd come to collect. He dismounted before the fence, boots sinking deep into the snow. The horse huffed steam, restless, sensing its master's tension. From the barn came the sound of hammering, a small, steady rhythm, more determined and strong. Elijah moved closer, his hand instinctively near the colt at his hip. When he reached the open barn door, he saw her, Clara, her back straight, shoulders tight beneath a worn shawl, mending the busted gate latch with a look that could have cut granite. "You came back," she said without turning, her voice as calm as a lake before a storm. "Reckon I did," Elijah replied. "You been busy." Her hands didn't stop working. Somebody has to keep this place from falling apart. He stepped inside, the familiar scent of hay and horse sweat surrounding him. I told you I'd send a man to help. And I told you I don't need one. She finally faced him then, eyes hard but rimmed red. You came to check if I'm still breathing or if your conscience can rest easy. Elijah's jaw tightened. I came to settle things right. The silence that followed was thick, with everything unspoken between them. The debt, the pride, the cold nights both had spent trying not to think about the other. Clara's hammering stilled, and for a moment neither moved. Then the sound of a child's cry drifted from the cabin, shrill and frightened. Clara's head snapped toward the door. "Stay here," she said, voice breaking its calm edge, but Elijah was already moving. Inside, the cabin was chaos. The youngest child, Hannah, sat crying near the hearth, clutching a rag doll, while the oldest boy, Samuel, stood by the window with a rifle too big for his hands. His eyes were wide with fear. "There's men outside," he stammered. "Riders, 3 of them, coming fast." Clara went pale. Elijah stepped to the window and looked out. Dust and snow swirled together, and out of it came 3 riders in dark coats, faces half covered with scarves, the kind of men who didn't ride out for friendly reasons. Inside, Elijah ordered, "Keep the children back." He stepped out the door and drew his Colt. The hammer clicked loud enough to echo through the cold. "You boys lost," he called. The lead rider laughed, a harsh, jagged sound that carried across the yard. "Not lost, Boone. Just came to finish what your daddy started." Elijah's stomach turned to stone. He knew that voice. Russell Kane, one of the men who'd once worked the Boone spread before Elijah's father lost it all to greed and gunfire. "Elijah Boone," Kane spat, riding closer. "Last time I saw you, you were a boy hiding under a table while your old man got filled full of lead. Now you're playing rancher again, huh?" Elijah kept his stance firm, gun leveled. "This ain't about my father." Kane grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Oh, it's always about your father. Man owed a lot of debts, didn't he? And seems his boy took to collecting and back. Ain't that right, Widow Clark?" Clara stepped onto the porch behind Elijah, pale but steady. "You've no business here, Kane." Kane's grin widened. "I reckon I got plenty. Heard tell you had yourself a visitor. Big rancher. Lots of coin. Thought maybe you two struck a deal." Elijah's trigger finger twitched. "You got 3 seconds to turn that horse around." Kane's men laughed, but they didn't move. The air thickened with tension, the wind whistling like a warning. Then Kane's tone shifted, darker. "You took something from me, Boone. That ledger in your saddlebag. Your old man's notes. I want it." Elijah's heart thudded once hard. The ledger, his father's last record of land deals, names, debts. Proof of everything that had gone wrong. Proof of who betrayed them. He didn't get the chance to answer. A rifle cracked from a ridge, and the bullet whined past his shoulder, splintering the porch rail. Elijah dove for cover, shouting, "Get the kids down!" as more shots rang out. Kane's men dismounted, firing toward the cabin. Snow kicked up around Elijah's boots as he rolled behind the trough, firing back in quick, sharp bursts. He saw one man drop, another duck behind a fence post. The sharp scent of gunpowder filled the cold air. Inside, the children screamed, and Clara dragged them toward the cellar. Her hands trembled, but her movements were fierce, focused. She turned once toward Elijah, her voice raw. "Don't you die on me, Boone." Elijah grinned grimly. "Wasn't planning on it." Kane's voice echoed from behind the barn. "You think you can hide, Boone? You think you can outrun what your family did?" Elijah fired another shot, clipping the hat off one of the men. "You keep talking, Kane. Maybe I'll believe you're the law." Then came a sudden silence. No gunfire, no laughter, just the crunch of boots in snow. Elijah's gut twisted. He peered over the trough, and before he could react, Kane stepped out from behind the barn, his gun pressed against Samuel's head. "Now," Kane said softly, "why don't you drop that iron?" Elijah froze. Clara gasped from the doorway. The boy's face was streaked with dirt and tears, but he didn't move. "Don't hurt him," Elijah said. Kane smirked. That depends. The ledger. Give it to me. Elijah slowly reached for his saddlebag, every muscle coiled tight. Let the boy go first. Ledger first. Kane snapped. Elijah hesitated. In that heartbeat of stillness, the sound of boots crunching behind Kane broke the moment. Clara stepped from the shadows of the barn, rifle in her hands, her face pale but eyes burning with fury. Let him go. Kane turned just enough, and that's all Elijah needed. He fired once, clean, fast. The bullet hit Kane square in the chest. For a second, the outlaw looked stunned, like the cold itself had struck him. Then he crumpled into the snow, the boy breaking free as Clara dropped the rifle and ran forward. The fight was over before Elijah even holstered his gun. The other two men fled, disappearing into the white horizon. Silence settled heavy again, broken only by the wind's hollow moan. Clara knelt beside Samuel, pulling him close, trembling. Elijah stood nearby, chest heaving, smoke curling from the barrel of his gun. The ledger lay on the snow where he dropped it, the pages splayed open like a confession. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. It's done. Clara looked up at him, eyes filled with something he couldn't name. It'll never be done, Boone. Men like that don't stop. They'll send more. Then we'll be ready, he said quietly. She stared at him for a long moment. We. Elijah bent down, picked up the ledger, and tucked it inside his coat. Ain't just your fight anymore. They buried Kane at the far edge of the property that night, under a crooked oak. Snow fell soft, muting the world, and the only sound was the crackle of fire from the lantern they'd set beside the grave. The children watched from the porch, silent, their small faces pale in the light. Clara stood with her arms wrapped tight around herself. I didn't want you to come back, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I know, but you did anyway. Couldn't stay gone, he admitted. Didn't feel right. She turned to him then, eyes searching his face. You came here for money, Boone. For a debt. He looked out across the snow-covered fields. Maybe I did, but I reckon I found something else instead. The wind stirred her hair, catching the faint scent of smoke and pine. And what's that? He met her gaze, steady and unflinching. A reason to stay. For the first time in what felt like years, Clara smiled. Not the polite kind, not the guarded one, but something soft, fragile, and real. The storm that had shadowed her for so long seemed to ease a little. Weeks passed. Winter broke. The snows melted into rivulets that carved through the hills, and the ranch began to breathe again. Together they rebuilt one fence post, one dawn at a time. Elijah worked beside Samuel, teaching him how to handle a Colt, how to mend a gate, how to look a man in the eye and not flinch. The younger children laughed more, their voices echoing across the open land. One evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge and painted the fields gold, Clara brought a pot of stew and set it on the porch table. Elijah sat across from her, hat on his knee, watching her in the fading light. You never told me what was in that ledger, she said. He shrugged. Names, numbers, men who owed my father, men who killed for greed. And what you do with it? Burn it, he said simply. Let the past stay buried. She nodded, quiet for a while. Then, you're not the man I thought you were, Boone. He smiled faintly. Neither are you, Clara Clark. The silence that followed wasn't awkward anymore. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that felt like home. When night fell and the stars came out bright and endless, Elijah stood on the porch, watching the horizon. Clara joined him, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Out there, she said softly, I used to think the world ended, that beyond these hills there was nothing but loss. He turned to her. And now, she whispered, it feels like it's just beginning that. Elijah nodded, eyes fixed on the distance. Reckon that's the thing about debts, Clara. Sometimes you pay 'em with more than coin. She looked at him, her expression softening. And sometimes, she said, you're repaid in ways you never expected. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of laughter from inside the cabin. The firelight flickered through the window, warm and alive. Elijah Boone, once a man chasing ghosts and debts, finally understood what he'd been riding toward all along. It wasn't redemption he'd come to collect. It was belonging. And in that quiet moment, under the wide western stars, he found it. So, what do we take from this tale? Maybe it's this. The frontier wasn't just a land of debts and danger, but a place where broken souls found their way back to life.